Hello, we are on the Unit 5 trig review sheet, and the question is, given the angle negative 462, find the coterminal angle from 0 degrees to 360 degrees, the quadrant, and the reference angle. Now this question is asking for three separate things. We're going to find the coterminal angle first, and coterminal angle just means an angle that ends in the same position as another. In order to end in the same position, you're going to go around the circle one full time and end right where you started. And one full circle is 360 degrees. Now, you can go clockwise or counterclockwise around the circle, so you can either add or subtract, and you need to figure out which one is better for you. In this case, we have a negative angle measure, and I want to get to a positive angle measure, something between 0 and 360. So it doesn't make sense to subtract because I'm just going to get more negative. So in this case, I'm going to add 360 degrees, and that's going to get me negative 102. So negative 102 is coterminal, and it ends in the same place as negative 462, but it's still not in the parameters that I want. So I'm going to add another 360 degrees to find another coterminal angle, and that's going to give me 258. So my coterminal angle is 258 degrees. And now that's an easier number to work with because when they're asking for the quadrant, instead of working with negative 462, I can work with 258. Your quadrantal angles are 0, 90 degrees, 180, 270, and 360. We have 258. So that means we're between 180 and 270, which means we are in the third quadrant. And now they want the reference angle. So if you draw the angle measure, and we're going to work with 258 degrees. 258 degrees is again between 180 and 270. It's somewhere in the third quadrant. So we're starting at our initial side, always on the x-axis, and we're going to put our angle measure somewhere between 180 and 270. Now, reference angles are always compared to your x-axis. So I'm going to go to the terminal side of this angle, and I'm going to compare it to the x-axis. And this is what we're trying to find the angle measure of. So we are at 258, and I'm comparing it to 180. 258 minus 180 is going to give you the value of your reference angle. So that's going to be 78 degrees. And remember, a reference angle is also always less than 90 degrees. So if you get an answer that is a reference angle of 95, you know that's wrong because it's supposed to be an acute angle less than 90. Let's try the next one. Given the point negative 3, 2, draw your bow tie triangle in the correct quadrant and label it correctly. Then find the missing side. Okay, so if you have a normal xy axis and we have negative 3, 2, which is going to be here. That's my coordinate, negative 3, 2. When they say draw your bow tie triangle, all the triangles in each quadrant should form a bow tie. So in this particular case, I am in the second quadrant, so I should have a triangle that looks like this, part of your bow tie. That means you're going to drop it to the x-axis, and you're going to drop it to the origin to get a triangle, and if you continue drawing other triangles, makes part of your bow tie. Anyway, -3 is your x-coordinate, and the x-axis goes left to right. So it makes sense to label the side of the triangle that goes left to right -3. 2 is your y-coordinate, and the y-axis goes up and down, so the side of your triangle that goes up and down is your value of 2. In order to find the missing side, you are going to use the Pythagorean theorem, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Keep in mind that c squared is always your hypotenuse. So I have 2 squared plus -3 squared equals x squared, because that's what we're trying to find. What is the hypotenuse? 2 squared is 4. Please be careful. You need to use parentheses in your calculator. -3 squared is +9. If you don't use parentheses, you're going to get the wrong answer, which is -9. Use parentheses when you have negative values. So you're going to get that x squared is 4 plus 9 is 13. So x is the square root of 13. Technically, it's plus or minus when you take a square root, but the hypotenuse is always a positive value. From there, for part B, they want you to find the value of the trig ratios. Now, when you label this with your opposite, hypotenuse, and adjacent, theta is always at the origin. So radical 13 is the hypotenuse because it is the diagonal, it is the longest side, it is opposite of the right angle. Adjacent will always be on your x-axis because it is next to theta. And the side that is opposite of theta at the origin is going to be 2. And when we find these values, we're going to keep SOHCAHTOA in mind. Now they're asking for sine. From SOHCAHTOA, sine is opposite over hypotenuse. The opposite is 2. The hypotenuse is radical 13. Cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. Your adjacent is -3. Your hypotenuse is radical 13. Now, I know that it doesn't make sense to have a side length be a negative value, but it's not saying that's a negative value, it's saying it's a negative position because you're on the left side of the x-axis, and on the left side, you have negative x values. When they're asking for cosecant, cosecant is the reciprocal of sine. Remember, a C has to pair with an S. So ordinarily, sine, actually we already have sine above. So if sine was 2 over radical 13, then cosecant is radical 13 over 2. Secant, the S pairs with the C in cosine, and we already have cosine. So if cosine is -3 over radical 13, then secant is going to be radical 13 over -3. Tangent is opposite over adjacent, which is 2 over -3. And cotangent is the reciprocal of tangent. So that means cotangent is going to be -3 over 2. On to number 3. So for the next question, they're saying sine is greater than 0. So what they're saying is sine is positive. And sine, if you remember, pairs with y. So they're asking, where is y positive? Y is positive anywhere above the x-axis. So y is positive here and here. They're saying cosine is less than 0. So cosine is negative. And cosine pairs with x. So they're asking, where is x negative? X is negative on the left side of your xy axis, which would be here and here. Now they're asking that you want both of them to happen at the same time. And the overlap where they both happen, where sine is positive and cosine is negative, happens to be right here. Now your quadrants go 1, 2, 3, and 4. So they're talking about the second quadrant. For number 4, they want you to use the identity. Immediately when you see that they're telling you to use something, you should write it down. So sine squared theta plus cosine squared theta equals 1. Make sure you are putting the squared, the exponents, before theta and not after it, because it makes a difference. They want you to find the value of cosine to the nearest hundredth. We have to round. If sine is negative 0.3. Okay. We're going to get to the quadrant part later on. Because they're telling me sine of theta is negative 0.3, I'm going to substitute in the equation that they told me to use. And keep in mind this is sine, not sine squared, so you still have to square the negative 0.3. Please be careful. Don't think that you can do this in your head. You want to use your calculator to double check your work. And because it's a negative value, you need to use parentheses. Negative 0.3, close parentheses, square it. You get 0.09. And positive, because when you square a negative, it should become positive. Now, they're asking for us to find cosine, so we're going to try and get cosine by itself by bringing over the 0.09. In your calculator, please use the calculator. 1 minus 0.09 is 0.91. We have cosine squared, but we want just cosine, so you're going to take the square root. Be careful when you take the square root, you need to include a plus or minus. Now the question is, how do you determine whether it's plus or minus? And we're going to use the part of the question that we didn't use before. We're in quadrant 3. So on your xy axis, quadrant 3 is the bottom left. And if you were to take a coordinate in quadrant 3 on your xy axis, you would have negative x values and you would have negative y values. Now we're talking about cosine, and cosine pairs with x. Now x is negative, which means cosine is also negative. So I'm only going to choose the negative value, negative square root of 0.91. Keep in mind that this is the exact value. However, the question did ask you to round, so I'm going to put this in my calculator. Negative square root of 0.91. And they asked us to round to the nearest hundredth, which is 2 decimals. So it's going to be negative 0.95. Let's try the next one. We have 2 more to go. They want you to find the degree measure of an angle whose radian measure is 2 pi over 5. Anytime you want to convert between radians and degrees, you are going to go to your reference sheet. And we even have it on the side for you. This is exactly what you're going to see. You need to know which one to use. So you're going to read the question. You're going to circle the value they're giving you. This value that they are giving you is radians. So because the unit of the thing they are giving you is radians, you are going to use the radian formula. 1 radian equals 180 over pi degrees. But the thing is, we don't have 1 radian, we have 2 pi over 5 radians. So I'm going to multiply both sides. Now this says 2 pi over 5, because anything times 1 is itself, radians. That makes sense. We had 2 pi over 5 radians. On the right side, you're going to have to evaluate it. Just know that your pi's cancel out because one's in the numerator and one's in the denominator. So what we're going to do in our calculator is 2/5 times 180 because the pi's canceled out. And you're going to get 72. So this is equivalent to 72 degrees. For the next one, they want you to find the radian measure of an angle whose measure is 330 degrees. Circle the number and notice the units on that number. Those units are degrees. We even have the degree symbol, right? So we're going to go to the degree formula and use that one. 1 degree is equal to pi over 100 radians. We don't have 1 degree, we have 330 of them. So 330 times 1 is 330 degrees. On the flip side, you have to evaluate this. Now, they did not ask you to round. So if they don't ask you to round, you do not put pi in the calculator. Really important. So instead of putting pi in the calculator, we're going to leave out the pi. We're going to substitute it with a 1. So I have 330 times alpha y equals, to get your fraction. We're not doing pi over 180. We're leaving the pi out, replacing it with a 1. So 1 over 180, and there we go. You're going to get 11 over 6. Now, the thing is, you didn't put pi in the calculator, but you do need to still include it in your answer. Pi was originally in the numerator, so I'm going to put it in the numerator of my answer. So I get it is 11 pi over 6 radians. And I think we're done. So that's all for the video.